A small smile crept onto his face. "Now you're the one making me feel better, Silica," he said with a grin. But in that moment something weird happened to Silica. She felt a sharp pang in her chest, like a strong cramp. Her heart started racing super fast. And she didn't know why. Her face grew hot too. Quickly Silica let go of Kirito's hand and grabbed her own hands, holding them tight against her chest. It was like her body was reacting all on its own. The pain just wouldn't go away. "Hey, is everything okay?" he asked, leaning in across the table. She shook her head really fast, trying to force a smile. "I'm fine, I'm just starving," she said, after they finished their yummy dinner of stew, black bread, and cheesecake for dessert. It was already 8:30. They thought it would be a good idea to get some rest before their big adventure tomorrow, on the 47th floor, so they headed upstairs in the weather vane, ready to get a good night's sleep. Imagine walking down a super long hallway, lined with tons of doors. Guess what? Kirito's room just so happened to be right next to his friend Silica's. As they said their goodbyes, they looked at each other and burst out laughing. "Good night," they chimed in unison. Before getting ready for bed, Silica had an idea. She wanted to try out some cool moves with the brand new dagger Kirito had just given her, so she started practicing some awesome combos. As Silica held the new weapon, she felt its extra weight. But it was hard to focus on that when her heart was racing so fast. She tried to tune out the excitement and concentrate. And it paid off. She successfully landed a 5-hit combo without messing up. Feeling relieved, Silica shut down her game, took off her gear, and collapsed onto her bed, exhausted. She slapped the wall to make the menu appear. Then switched off the lights. She was super tired and expected to fall asleep right away. But for some reason, she just couldn't relax. It wasn't just because of her exhaustion, something else was missing. Ever since Pina had become her friend, she'd gotten used to snuggling up with her soft, cuddly body every night. Now her bed felt huge and lonely without her. Silica had been tossing and turning for what felt like forever. Finally she threw off her blankets and sat up in bed. Her eyes landed on the wall to her left. The one that separated her room from Kirito's. Suddenly she really wanted to talk to him some more. But then she felt a little surprised at herself. What was going on? She had only met Kirito that morning. And he was a boy. It was weird that she already felt like she could talk to him about anything. Silica had always kept her distance from guys like him. But there was something about this mysterious swordsman that drew her in. She couldn't figure out why she felt this way though. As she checked the time in the corner of her screen, she saw it was almost 10 p.m. The streets below her window were quiet now except for a dog howling in the distance. It sounded lonely. Silica thought to herself, it's ridiculous to feel this way. It was time for bed, but Silica had other plans. She snuck out of her room trying to be super quiet. "I'll just tap gently," she whispered to herself. First she checked her stuff and put on her favorite outfit. A really cute tunic. As she walked down the hallway lit up by flickering candles, she stopped in front of his door and hesitated. It took a while, but Silica finally worked up the courage to knock on the door. She raised her right hand and gave 2 gentle taps. In this game, doors are like super powerful sound blockers. You can't hear anything from the other side. And nobody can hear you either. But there's a special rule: if someone knocks, the door isn't soundproof for 30 seconds. Kirito must have been waiting, because he opened the door right away. When it swung open, Silica saw that Kirito had taken off his cool gaming gear, and was wearing a plain shirt instead. His eyes went super wide when he saw her standing there. "Is everything okay?" he asked. Silica got really nervous. She had no idea what to say. She didn't have a good excuse for showing up at his place. Saying she just wanted to chat seemed too babyish. So, she stumbled over her words. Well, you see, I wanted to ask about the 47th floor. Luckily he didn't push her for more info. "Oh, sure," he said. And that was it. "Want to head downstairs?" Kirito asked. But the girl had a different idea. "Actually, can we talk in your room?" she said quickly. Then she added, "We don't want anyone to overhear our important conversation." Kirito looked unsure, scratching his head. "I guess you're right," he muttered. He stepped aside and opened the door to his room. "Okay, come on in." As they entered, the girl saw that Kirito's room was identical to hers. The bed was on one side of the room, and a small table with a single chair sat on the other side. That was it, there wasn't anything else in the room. It was simple and quiet, the perfect place for a private chat. As Kirito and Silica hung out, a cool orange glow filled the room from a lantern on the wall. Kirito offered Silica the chair, and he plopped down on the bed. He pulled up his menu, and started digging through his stuff. With a flourish he produced a small box. It was something he'd done many times before. Inside the box was a tiny crystal ball that sparkled like crazy in the lantern's light. Silica's eyes widened as she checked out the ball.
Wow, it's so pretty!
She exclaimed. What is it? Kirito smiled. It's called a mirage sphere, he said. He gently tapped the sphere with his finger, and thus like magic, another menu popped up. He tapped a few buttons and hit OK. Suddenly the orb lit up with a bright blue glow. A holographic picture appeared above it, and Silica's eyes widened in amazement. The image showed an entire floor of Aincrad, complete with tiny towns and forests. You could even see individual trees. It was way more detailed than the simple maps you could look at on your system menu. Wow, Silica breathed, totally mesmerized by the cool, see-through blue landscape floating in front of her. Imagine being able to see tiny people moving around. If you squint really hard. Silica's eyes were fixed on the map as Kirito explained their journey. Okay, so this is the main part of town, and that's the hill of memories over there, he said, pointing with his finger. He showed her which path they needed to take, warning her about some tricky monsters in the area. As Kirito talked, Silica felt a cozy feeling inside. His calm voice made her feel safe and relaxed. Once we cross this bridge we'll be able to see the hill, he said, but then he suddenly stopped talking. Silica wondered what was wrong. Kirito put his finger to his lips and gave her a serious look. Shotri whispered, telling her to be quiet. Something was up. Kirito's eyes snapped towards the door. Suddenly he jumped out of bed and ran to the door, yanking it open. Who's there? He shouted. But instead of an answer, Silica heard footsteps pounding down the hall. She quickly moved to the doorway and peeked around Kirito to see who was making the noise. Just as she looked, a figure darted down the stairs at the end of the hall. What just happened? Silica asked, confused. I think someone was listening in on us, Kirito said, his voice low, but I thought you couldn't hear what people were saying through doors. Silica replied, Kirito explained. That's usually true, but if someone has a good enough eavesdropping skill, they can pick up on voices even when they're behind closed doors. Kirito walked back into the room and shut the door behind him. He plopped down on the bed looking totally lost in thought. Silica sat down beside him, hugging herself tightly. She seemed really nervous about something. But why would someone sneak around and listen to our conversation? Kirito started to ask. Silica cut him off, her voice filled with worry. I think we'll figure out the answers soon enough, she said. It was like she had a bad feeling that something weird was going on. Okay, just a sec, he said with a cheeky smile. He tucked away the crystal map and pulled up a message screen. His fingers started typing super fast on the special keyboard that floated in front of him. Meanwhile, Silica snuggled into a ball on the bed behind him. Suddenly memories from her past life started coming back to her. She remembered her dad who used to write news stories for a living. It was like a floodgate had opened, and all these old memories were pouring back in. Imagine a guy who's always bent over an old computer, typing away with a scowl on his face. That's Kirito. Silica loved sneaking peeks at him while he worked. She used to be nervous around him, but now she feels totally comfortable. As she gazed at Kirito's profile, she felt a warm and fuzzy feeling wash over her. Before she knew it, her eyes got heavy, and she dozed off. But her snooze was short-lived. A ringing sound in her ears made Silica slowly open her eyes. Silica's alarm clock blasted in her ear, or at least it seemed that way to her. It was 7,000 a.m., and time to start the day. She threw off the covers and sat up. Feeling pretty good for a morning grump like herself, the great night's sleep can work magic. And Silica's mind felt fresh and clear. As she yawned big, she swung her legs over the side of the bed, ready to jump out. But then she froze. The sunlight streaming through the window showed her something that made her stop in her tracks. The guy was sleeping on the floor, leaning against her bed. As soon as eyes flew open, and she was about to let out a loud scream, She thought someone had broken into the room, but then she remembered where she was. She had fallen asleep in Kirito's room last night, and never went back to her own bed. As soon as she realized this, her face started burning with embarrassment. It felt like a dragon was breathing fire right on her cheeks. The game Sai-o was known for making emotions look really extreme, so she wouldn't be surprised if steam was actually rising off her face. Silica woke up to find Kirito missing from their bed. She realized he must have gotten up and decided to sleep on the floor instead. Her face turned bright red as she felt embarrassed and guilty. She covered her face with her hands and squirmed with discomfort. After a few seconds, Silica calmed down and quietly got out of bed. She tiptoed around to the other side of the room and peeked at Kirito. What she saw made her want to laugh. His tough guy face had softened into a cute baby-like expression while he slept. Silica couldn't help but sneak a peek at Kirito while he was sleeping. When he was awake, his tough expression made him look way older. But now he just looked like a regular guy, not much older than Silica herself. It was kind of funny to sit there watching him without him even knowing, but Silica knew they couldn't waste any more time. She gently poked Kirito's shoulder and said, "Hey, Kirito, wake up. It's morning." Kirito's eyes popped open instantly. He blinked really fast a few times, staring at Silica like he was trying to figure out where he was. His confused face suddenly changed to one of surprise and worry. "Oh, sorry," he exclaimed, bowing his head. "I didn't mean to scare you. You were sleeping so soundly that I didn't want to wake you up. So I tried to carry you back to your room. But the door was locked." It turned out that the game had a strict rule. If someone else's name was on the door, you couldn't get in unless they said it was okay. And if you weren't friends with the person who rented the room, forget about it, there was no way to sneak in. Silica quickly waved her hands back and forth. No, it's my fault," she exclaimed. "I'm sorry I took up so much space on your bed." Kirito stood up and smiled. "Don't worry about it," he said. "You don't get sore or hurt here, no matter how you sleep." But then he stretched his neck and cracked it, which made Silica wonder if he was really okay. He stretched his arms up high and yawned, then looked down at Silica with a "oh yeah, forgot" kind of look. "Hey, good morning," he said with a smile. Silica's face lit up. "Good morning," she replied. They both burst out laughing. After fueling up with a big breakfast, they headed outside into the sunny morning. Their adventure was about to begin. They were going to tackle the hill of memories on the 47th floor. Imagine walking down the street and seeing two totally different groups of people. Some players were just starting their day, excited for a new adventure. Others were coming home from a long night of hunting, looking pretty worn out. As they crossed paths, you could tell who was who just by looking at their faces. Before they went their separate ways, many of them stopped by the item shop next to the inn to grab some important supplies, like potions. With their bags restocked, they were ready to head to the teleport gate and see where it would take them next. They made it to the portal without any trouble from those annoying guys who were bothering them yesterday. Just as they were about to jump in, Silica stopped suddenly. "Wait a minute. I don't remember the name of the town on the 47th floor," she said. She was about to check her map, but Kirito jumped in to help. "Don't worry, I've got this," he said with a smile. He held out his hand, and after a moment, Silica took it. "Teleport, Floria," Kirito exclaimed. Then a bright light flashed around them, and whoosh, they were gone. Silica's eyes widened as the weird tugging feeling stopped. Suddenly her vision was filled with a blast of colors.
Wow! She exclaimed.
Super excited. The teleport square on the 47th floor was like nothing she had ever seen before. It was packed with tons and tons of flowers. Narrow paths led off in 4 different directions, surrounding a big open space. The rest of the area was divided into huge brick planters, overflowing with all sorts of weird and wonderful plants she had never seen before. "This is amazing," she breathed. Most people called this floor the flower garden, and now Silica could see why. Imagine an entire floor, all 47 stories of it, blanketed with colorful flowers. It's not just a small town that's blooming either. If you've got some extra time, you can even explore the forest of giant flowers on the north side. But for now, let's just enjoy the view. Silica smiled at Kirito and leaned in to check out a nearby flower bed. She picked a pale blue flower that looked like a tiny bottle and took a deep breath. The scent was amazing. This particular flower was super detailed, with 5 thin petals, white centers and a light green stem. Not every flower was this perfect though. Some were more basic, and that's okay. After all, there are thousands of plants and buildings in Aincrad, and they can't all be super fancy. Still, it's cool to see the little details that make this world feel so real. Imagine a super powerful computer trying to create an entire virtual world. Even with its mighty brain, it couldn't handle all the tiny details that made the game feel real. To avoid crashing, the game creators came up with a clever solution called the detail focusing system. Here's how it works. When a player looks closely at something, like a cool sword or a fancy armor, the game zooms in and shows more details. It's like using a magic magnifying glass. But if nobody is looking, the game keeps those details hidden to save energy. When Silica first learned about this feature, she was so careful not to overload the system. She didn't want to be the one responsible for causing problems. So she tried not to stare too closely at everything around her, even though it was tempting. She felt a little guilty, thinking that if she looked too closely, she might slow down the whole game. Silica just couldn't help herself. She bounced from one colorful flower to the next, like a busy bee collecting nectar. She loved each and every one of them, taking in their sweet fragrance. After she'd had her fill of sniffing and smiling, Silica stood up and took another look around the plaza. What she saw was super romantic. Lots of couples strolling along the winding paths, holding hands or arms, and chatting happily together. Imagine being in a place that's just perfect for a romantic moment. Silica sneaked a peek at Kirito, who was standing next to her looking pretty relaxed. She thought to herself, do we look like all the other couples? Suddenly her face felt like it was on fire. Silica tried to play it cool by shouting out an excited battle cry. Let's go explore the fields. Kirito blinked in surprise, but then nodded and started walking alongside her. As they left the teleport plaza behind, they strolled through streets filled with beautiful flowers. It was a pretty amazing sight. As Silica walked through the vibrant streets, she couldn't stop thinking about her meeting with Kirito from the day before. It felt like forever ago, but really it had only been 24 hours. That's how big of an impact the mysterious black swordsman had on her. She sneaked a peek at Kirito, wondering if he felt the same way about their encounter. But his face was as calm and expressionless as always, making it impossible to guess what was going on in his mind. Silica spoke up, her voice a little shaky. Hey Kirito, can I ask you something? She said. What's with your sister? You mentioned I remind you of her, and now I'm curious. Kirito looked surprised. Why do you want to know about her all of a sudden? He asked. Talking about the real world wasn't usually done in Aincrad. It was like a big secret that nobody wanted to discuss. The reason was that if you started thinking about how fake this online world was, you might start to forget that death here was permanent. And that was a scary thought. But Silica really wanted to know more about Kirito's sister. She wondered what this girl was like, and why Kirito thought they were similar. So she waited for Kirito to answer her question, hoping he would share a little bit about his sister with her. So, what did you want from me? She asked. Did he see her as a kind of family member? He hesitated before answering. To be honest, we weren't super close, he said quietly. And she's not actually my sister, she's my cousin. She grew up with our family though. There were some pretty good reasons for that, but I'm not sure she knows the whole story. To be honest, I've always tried to keep some space between us. Even at home, I didn't like running into her. I let out a deep breath and thought about why things were this way. It didn't help that my grandfather is super strict. When I was 8, he made both of us start taking kendo lessons at a dojo near our house. But I just couldn't get excited about it. After 2 years I decided to quit. Let's just say I got in big trouble for that. But my sister was a total rock star. She stood up for me and started practicing kendo even harder than before. In fact, she got so good that she began winning awards at national tournaments. Meanwhile, I discovered my own passion: computers. My sister kept pushing herself to be the best at kendo, and it really paid off. She was on a roll right up until Grandpa passed away. I'm pretty sure he was thrilled about that, but for me it's been a different story ever since. It made me feel like I wasn't good enough compared to her. Being around her just made me even more nervous and unsure of myself. And that's how I ended up here, Kirito said, pausing for a moment. He glanced down at Silica with a thoughtful look. Maybe the real reason I helped you is because it makes me feel better about my own problems. Honestly, I think I'm trying to make up for feeling guilty about something that happened with my sister. Silica was an only child, so she didn't totally get what Kirito was talking about. But for some reason, she thought she could relate to how his sister might be feeling. I don't think your sister is mad at you, Silica said. If someone practices kendo as much as she does, they must really love it. You can't put that much effort into something without enjoying it. Silica was trying to find the right words to say, but she hoped Kirito would understand what she meant. Kirito cracked a smile. You always know how to make me feel better, he said. Silica's heart felt happy and warm inside. She was thrilled that Kirito was finally opening up to her. As they walked, they reached the southern gate of town. Above them, a shiny arch sparkled in the light. Vines with beautiful white flowers wrapped around the metal frame, making it look like a magical entrance. As they walked down Main Street, the buildings started to fade away, and the green hills took over. The street disappeared into the distance, hidden by a hazy spring fog. Well, this is where our adventure begins, Kirito said with a grin. Silica nodded, letting go of his arm, and standing up straight. You're pretty strong, so I don't think you'll have any problems with the monsters around here, she said. But just in case, Kirito dug into a small pouch on his belt, and pulled out a sparkly blue crystal. He dropped it into Silica's hand, and it glittered in the sunlight. Check this out, it's a teleport crystal, he said, his eyes serious. Things don't always go as planned when you're exploring. If something weird happens, and I tell you to bail, use this crystal to get back to our town fast. Can you promise me that? His voice was firm, but a little shaky. I've had a whole group of friends disappear on me before, and I don't want that to happen again. Kirito's face was set in a determined expression. I don't want to make that mistake again, he said firmly. Silica nodded, knowing she had no other choice. Kirito asked her again to promise him something, but then he smiled to calm her down. All right, let's go, he exclaimed. Silica grabbed the dagger at her waist, and whispered a silent promise to herself. She wouldn't freak out like she did yesterday. Okay, she said, trying to sound brave. She was ready to use all her might to battle whatever came their way. But then, a bag. What is that? It's so gross, they shouted. Just minutes after heading into the wilderness on the 47th floor, they faced their first monster. Eek! Get away from me. It was a terrifying sight. The creature looked like a walking flower, but not a pretty one. Its thick dark green stem was as big as a human arm. Long roots shot out from the bottom, gripping the ground like fingers. It was super creepy. Imagine a giant sunflower on steroids. This creepy creature had a big yellow head that looked like a sunflower, but it was totally terrifying. In the middle of the head was a huge toothy mouth that was open wide, showing off its bright red inside. It was like something out of a nightmare. Two thick vine-like arms stuck out of the stem, which was like the creature's body. These arms looked super strong and were probably used to grab and attack its victims. As Silica stood there, the man-eating flower snapped its jaws open and closed, getting ready to strike. Then it lunged at her with its long tentacle-like arms waving wildly in the air. It was a pretty scary sight.